some of the information that we went through here today. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jane and staff.
So we're going to have Lisa come to the table with us and Kelly. And we've got a course in the background if we need other things. So basically, what we put together is some of the things that we talked about at the board retreat. So we want to, I think this is an annual thing that the board does, is to kind of look ahead and see what topics we're going to be working on for this year. So I'm going to let Lisa take it from here, and some of us will be jumping in as we move along.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. So we want to spend a little bit of time today. It's our annual really overview of ways of working and calendaring and scoping out our agenda of topics for our work group sessions and our other important meetings and times that we have together. So by the end of our meeting today, we want to be able to review and remind ourselves of our strategic projects, remind ourselves of our ways of working, and then review the topics that we'd like to put on the agenda for discussion, knowing full well that the two big buckets of work that you all are engaging in are the superintendent search and a successful facilities referendum. So we want to keep the scope in mind and the pace in mind so that we can all be fully present and attentive to the work that we're doing. So the next slide is just a reminder of the 5 strategic framework strategies that we now have in our framework. And we're going to talk a little bit about the priority projects within those strategies that we may want to bring to the board if they require a vote or further conversation. So we have some thoughts about that and want to hear from you also about that. Okay, ways of working.
So we talked about these ways of working at the retreat, and we looked at them as both individual kind of ways of working and how we want to actually be as a collective group. So, I mean, basically they're just the ground rules of being positive, owning our own impact, active trust building and empathy, and listening with each other and with other folks as they come to the board, and acknowledge that we're actually making decisions that are impacting our children, and intentionally think about what that means, that there are people behind numbers. We see a lot of numbers, and just really kind of holding that in mind, that behind the numbers there are actually children, people, families. We talked a bit about the responsible use of social media, and hoping that we have that pretty much ground rules under that. As a collective, we talked about having grounding our discussions and our values, our core values, and those are excellence, belonging, racial equity and social justice, voice, focus, and creativity. They are in the strategic framework in the Dandy book, in case you ever want to refer people to that. We said that we wanted to have a growth mindset as a board, and to leave open spaces for addressing dissenting views, other people's perspectives, and just making sure that all the way around we're being respectful of the fact that we bring a lot of different viewpoints to the board, and that's a good thing. It's a really good thing. So, in that thing, we want to be sure that we're modeling this wonderful cooperative partnership with the folks who come from the senior leadership team to the board, and vice versa, with the board to the senior leadership team. Yes. My microphone.
So do I have to start over?
Oh, no.
Oh, good. Okay. Okay, somebody be responsible for telling me to turn that on. Right? Thank you. So then we want to, and this is really important because we had a wonderful week last week. We had Leadership Institute for 2 days, and it was a real focus on how we approach this important work that we're doing with an eye on humanity, both for ourselves, for our students, for each of us, so that we're just taking that into account as we move forward. And for us, it means, kind of keeping an eye on late meetings. We want to acknowledge that we're human and that we make our best decisions when we can stay focused and do that in a timely manner. And then just watch how we actually interact with each other, making sure that's very positive and knowing that it's really important that we maintain that way of being so that we can really hear each other, because if we're not maintaining that positivity, chances are we're not listening to each other. So we want to really be able to be open and hear each other as we have our important discussions this year. So I think I kind of captured that, and Gloria is going to take
Sure.
us into the process.
And then, as you recall, we talked a lot about also process, the ways of working, right? Using protocols that foster authentic discussions. You know, just a reminder that the board acts on majority when we talk about specific priorities or specific issues, topics that we want to have the staff work on, that it does take a majority of the board to make that decision. Work group chair solicits questions, asks from board and synthesizes into specific requests. So the work group chairs will meet regularly with our staff on that and bring the information to the board. Work group chair meets with senior leadership team lead to discuss requests, finalize contact and protocol. Requests for data and supplemental information via interim assistant superintendent of staff and operations. Work group meetings elements. We want to make sure that we have a clear purpose, right? That we understand what our purpose is during those meetings and what decisions that we need to make as a board to provide guidance and feedback to our staff, and having concise presentations and authentic conversations. And before we move on, Nikki, is there a question in relates
Yes,
to this?
actually-
Okay.
Yeah, it actually is. On the board acts on majority, I want to make sure the board acts on majority, not just, I think I'm hearing this, I was wondering if we could even do a hand vote, not a counting vote, just so I could see who's the majority and who isn't. I think that's just easier to see and easier to monitor, because I can't always tell.
Oh, gotcha. Okay,
who
when
agrees
we,
and who disagrees, that's the only thing I was going to say.
yes, great point, Nikki. I know sometimes that gets a little confusing, so we just have to make sure that everybody can see what the majority, when we vote on a certain item, that everybody understands who
And also,
voted.
like, even in our discussions, can we do a hand vote every now and then, just to say, this is, do we agree, do we not?
Great,
Because sometimes I'm concentrating so hard, I don't see the other half of the room.
yeah. Sounds good, Nikki. All right, let's move on.
So, wanted to take a bit of an opportunity to talk about the topics for our work groups. We aim to keep these agendas focused on executing with the priority work in the strategic framework, so our most highest leverage work. And we also want to be able to support you all, the boards, that you have the time, the capacity, the brain space to lead the two superintendent search and also put together a high-quality, successful referendum. So knowing that there are times during the year when that is going to be heavy on meetings, heavy on night meetings, heavy on conversations, just want to be respectful of that workload for all of you and for all of us. So we've listed here really the three big meeting areas. So the instructional topics, we had thought initially as a team about focusing in on secondary vision and the pieces that are with that, and then also coming back to Black excellence. Around operational, Kelly would talk a little bit about long-range facility plan, referendum, and budget. And then not to be forgotten, our special meetings will focus primarily for you all on superintendent search, right? Those are the big buckets. So instruction, operational, and then special meetings are essentially your superintendent search. So it's really strategic framework, priority work and instruction, facilities and operation, and budget and operation. And then special meetings are the superintendent search. And we did provide a one-pager to the board with some thoughts on here that we will come back to after Kelly goes through what she's thinking about for referendum timeline.
Another, is your question in relates?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you just clarify a little bit, Lisa? What do you mean by secondary vision? Because I'm making a story in my head. I just want to make sure that it's the
Yep.
correct.
So we're going to get to that in the one pager. I'll give you some examples on there. Good question. I'll hold that in my head, Ananda. Thank you.
So the purpose of this slide, that I was discussing with Gloria as we were preparing for tonight, is to help give the board an idea of where the administrative work comes in around the referendum and where the board's work comes in around the referendum as we think about the timeline of the upcoming year. So when we look at the kind of the August to December timeline, that's heavy in the administration's work. We'll be out in the community, getting a lot of feedback, actually pulling together actual research for you that we will bring to you in January. Board members are more than welcome to join for listening any of the sessions between now and then. But in January is then when we present what we heard from the public, kind of the research paper we produce, that then gives the board the chance to narrow the scope, the dollar amount, and the scope of the projects that'll be in the referendum. Once we do that in January, board members start to go to work kind of in their community to solidify the thoughts and the beliefs around the referendum before we ultimately do that vote. So there's probably more work on the board's perspective on the referendum in January, February. And then once the board takes the action to put a referendum question on the ballot, the board's work starts to become about getting the referendum out into the community. And you can probably rely on that work being heavier on your workload in April, May, because you'll want to get the push out before we lose kids and family to the summer. And then we'll want to regroup and make sure that we're in the community in the fall, right before a November referendum. This is all built with the idea of a November referendum, so you'll be wanting to save some capacity for yourselves in September and October as well. So that's just to give you an idea as we start to actually plan out what your calendar looks like for the year.
Any questions around that?
Clarifying. When you say that the board members will go out in the community, is that going to be with support of the district? Are we setting up ourselves? How does that work?
Absolutely, with support of the district. Kind of, we're in this the whole way together, but the board will have some conversations kind of going forward about how structurally you want to work together, both with us and with kind of community members as well. So those will need to be kind of logistical conversations we'll have in the January, February timeframe.
Chris?
So one thing I'm not seeing on the referendum focus is, I think at the last work group meeting where we talked about this, I brought up, and I think other people agreed, the need for possibly having an advisory committee in addition to the board and focus groups. Potentially a committee of people with expertise in areas where we want it, like finance, architecture, law, renewable energy, who not only would be able to give us good input on the referendum question, but also could then go out in the community and really help us sell the referendum as people with expertise. And I would like to see that added to this. I think it's a really important part of the process.
So whether it's specifically read in these words or not, it's absolutely part of the process. We heard your feedback. Our team is working on an updated document in response to what we heard in that meeting, and you'll get it in the weekly update in the next 2 weeks. Was the internal deadline we gave each other. So you'll see it loud and clear when we get that document out too. Okay.
I think this needs to become plural. It should be referenda focused because we're potentially looking at 2 questions. The operating referendum, I think, should not be slipped to the back burner until we write a question at the last minute. It needs to also be out there and considered. It's a lot of money, and we need to consider the 2 hand in hand.
So the September Operation Work Group will be geared towards getting directional feedback from the board regarding if there'll be a second question on the referendum to continue to work on.
So I asked Kelly to put this together as we've started to get a lot of questions by the community, and I just wanted Kelly to put this together as sort of something to get us started, so that we as a board know where we come in. And then also it helps us understand what Kelly and her staff are doing behind the scenes. I know they're meeting with tons of people and experts in our community, and we're going to get the opportunity to do that too. And we're going to be able to decide what that structure looks like as far as engagement. And because we have a wealth of knowledge out there and people who want to be a part of this process, and we need to bring them in. So we'll get there. All good points, Chris. Thank you. Nikki?
Just, gotta echo Chris on this. I did I did notice it was not in there, but the other, and I know you're taking it into account, and I understand that. Reason why I'm so big on codification, besides the whole lawyer annoyance, which I know is driving you all nuts, to me, having things codified and put into a document is kind of almost a promise. It's almost saying, hey, this is important, we get it, we hear you, and I know that it's going to be the weekly update, but I think that's why it was important to me. The other thing that I find really important is that, for transparency's sake, I think the district should do its focus groups, but I think we should be able to also be able to have ones that are less structured, I've had this discussion with Ananda, with people who aren't always included in focus groups, because there are people who are left out who don't always get their opinions heard. And this is a big deal. And we want everyone in our community to take stake in it, or we're not going to get this passed.
Great. Yeah. I think we're all eager just to jump into this, right? I mean, we know it's so important. So Kelly, thank you for all your work on this and putting this together. And look forward to the September update. Is there anything that the board can do between now and then? What is it that we should be doing as far as in response to questions from our community?
Yeah, so if you're getting questions, by all means, send them our way. If there's feeling like there's a need for an FAQ or some other document sooner rather than later, that's definitely something we could work on. But my main ask would be, we're going to turn around the communication plan document, updated based on the feedback you gave us. And so we need to know that we hit the mark on that document, because once kind of September starts, we're hitting the ground running.
Great. Okay. Anything else? Chris?
I just had some comments on the ways of working. Is this a good time to bring them up?
Sure, we can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're on the collective ways of working. I thought the individual ways of working were great. And with the collective ways of working, I really appreciated the focus on positivity. However, when we got to model positive SLT and BOE partnership, I kind of felt like that actually should be interaction and not partnership. And my reason for that is that it has felt like, and I actually got a lot of just like unsolicited input on this when I was reaching out to people in the community about our agenda for the coming year, that it has felt like over the past year or two, the board's way of working has been very much like with the superintendent in charge and the board and the SLT working together to help achieve the superintendent's vision. And they would like to actually see a shift, and I agree with this, to the board and superintendent working in partnership to achieve a vision. That's how boards work. So I almost feel like interactions would be a better word than partnership right there, just because of the fact that the board is really working in partnership with the superintendent to, both fulfill the executive function and the democratic governance function of achieving a vision for the district. As for watching for late meetings, I totally agree. I love to sleep. I hate being up too late. On the other hand, we have to work in open meetings. We can't do stuff behind the scenes, so there's going to be some late nights. It's just how it is. I hate that, but it's what it is. And I think those were my two big comments. So.
On the ways of working, one, the positivity. Thank you. I really, really thank you on that. Just want to make sure that I'm going to be as positive, but I like the fact that you left open space for dissent, for opening up discussions. Because not everyone will agree lockstep. We're human beings. But it helps me to make a decision, especially a final decision, if I hear where everyone's coming from, because they may have a viewpoint I'm not going to think about. I mean, Ali may have one viewpoint that I've never even considered. Or Savian might have another viewpoint that I never thought of. And that's always just, I find it very helpful. So I'm just saying good job and thank you guys for doing that. And Kelly, you've done a great job, so thank you.
Okay. Any questions, Kelly? Okay. Ananda, one more and then we'll go.
So I think the watch for late meetings is not the sentiment, like, we're gonna watch the late meeting. That's not, I don't think that that's the sentiment. I think it was more about elevating humanity.
watch for.
While we're in a late meeting. Because, you know, people may kind of act a little shorter, a little
Yeah.
not as positive because it's like 11 o'clock at night and it's like a 15-hour day already for some of us. I think it's more about that than actually watching. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with the watch for adversarial tone, but yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, well, this is ours, right? So, I mean, I think that these are conversations that we had at our board retreat. So, you know, we can change the late meetings, the adversarial tone and interactions. I think, you know, we can take it out. We don't necessarily have to keep it in.
I would take it out because it's kind of, who decides what constitutes overly adversarial? Do we decide as a group?
This is just our sort of like document to like just ways of working, right? I mean, I think that this did come up from my, what I recall from the conversations at how we treat staff. And, you know, in the past, it has been adversarial. So I think that that's the discussion that we had at board. So I think that, you know, facilitate discussions with an eye toward humanity, if we can remember that, right? That we treat each other, right, with humanity and our staff, so it's not as adversarial. We can ask tough questions in a very respectful way. So I think that that's, from what I recall, that conversation was all about. So we can take that out. We'll go ahead and take that out.
So we can take that out, and I think also just the emphasis on the positivity kind of really takes care of that as well.
Yep.
So-
Great. Anything else? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So, you want me to talk a little bit about the one
Yeah,
page?
these are the topics that we have been gathering and talking about and sifting and winnowing, if I can borrow a term.
University motto.
And then, just, before we go into the topics, just wanted to say, I just wanna, there are so many great, right? I think Chris used such a great list of items, and so did others, that we should focus on. And, I think that, I'd love to cover them all, right? And I think we can include them in other areas, and staff will do that. But I think we have to remember that we have two big decisions that normally boards in the past have not had to accomplish and work on. So we have the, superintendent search, we have the referendum. So that's going to keep us a lot of late nights, a lot of evening meetings. And I know we're all in this, and we will show up and do the work, but I just want to remind folks that as we start the discussion on topic items.
Thank you, Gloria.
Yep.
Gloria.
Okay.
One thing that you said.
Okay, Ananda, go ahead.
I would like to propose that the suggestions that everybody made go into some sort of queue, and for us to review a later day, because some of them are like, I do not want it for them to be forgotten, and then like
Right.
a year later, and then
Yeah.
we're like, oh, we
Absolutely.
put it in a queue. The community had like really verbalized that it's been really important. And we are still not seeing the results. In some of them, I can see that they might be some updates and might be more information, and others may be potential new bodies of work. So I just don't want to
Okay.
make sure that we don't lose that information. Thank you.
Great. Yep. We'll compile those.
That was actually what I was going to say. She just said it better.
Okay. Great. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So Gloria, thank you for starting us off, reaffirming your commitments as a board to a successful superintendent hire and search, and also a successful 2020 referendum. A reminder on the front of the page that these are the types of meetings that we engage in together, right? Our regular board meetings where we may have district progress highlighted through a superintendent's presentation, and then of course the consent item and the sort of routine agenda that comes with a regular full board meeting. Our work groups convene to preview policy items for a vote at the upcoming board meeting, or they're places where we talk about district strategy, about topics related to instruction or operations. We talked a little bit about retreats, serving the purpose of feedback, deep dives into critical issues or long-term strategy, and also board development. And then special meetings would be for sort of topics that don't necessarily fit in those other meetings, which would primarily be, right, your superintendent search conversations that you might engage in for special meetings. So on the opposite side, we put together a bit of a frame, started to incorporate some of the suggestions that people made. We didn't do all, because some of those came in late. But I appreciated, Gloria, that you said that, or maybe Ananda, you said that, there are some things that we're going to want to talk about face-to-face, but there are also some things that we will continue to do in written updates, or we can provide you in written report format along the way. We all know that there are only, so many opportunities to meet, so we started this just by thinking about what things would come up for a vote, what things were critically important to accelerate progress. And I won't read through all of this, but I'll give you sort of a high-level look at where some of the things kind of landed at first glance, and then we want to talk about that. So underneath the columns, regular board meeting, as you can see, superintendent's presentation, the voting topics are listed, and then other updates that are part of our regular cycle of discussion. We know that there is a taste to talk about pathways and how that is going this year, and we thought that that would be an excellent opportunity during a superintendent's presentation to bring in some school staff and central office staff to talk about how that's going. There's no vote that's required on that. It could be an informational update and let you know what our next steps are along the way with that. Around the instruction work group, the second column there, we know that we want to come and talk with you about the BEP and update around how that is going in our schools. We just talked to you about the English Language Learner Plan, and the executive summary came. We want to come back and actually have another opportunity once the full plan is disseminated and shared to go back and get your feedback before that actual new plan is written. And then we also heard that we wanted a deeper conversation about advanced learning monitoring and a special focus on honors moving forward. Around secondary, Ananda, to address your question from before, right, much of what we're thinking about in facilities is kind of aimed at secondary. Right, the either pathways implementation or other sorts of strategies and improvements at the secondary level. So we want to have an opportunity to give you an update on how things are going with the microschool, opportunity youth. Pathways would certainly fit in that as a secondary vision as well. So that's kind of what we're thinking there, either written or presentation format. Around Black Excellence, we want to be sure we have an opportunity to talk about community schools, some decisions to make around scaling and our partnerships that we are engaging in to forward that work. And then Black Excellence is highlighted in yellow. We will continue to come back to that. That is goal 3 in our strategic framework. We want to hear about what's happening with the coalition, and we want to have an opportunity to have an open dialogue about that. And then, believe it or not, under other and policy updates, this is a skinnier list than what we started with around policy. The CBITS partnership is up this year for discussion and reapproval, and then the policies that are most important, we listed there after consulting with Matt. And then I would just direct your attention to, we took a try at some of the written updates that we would be sharing. These have either been continual updates you've received in the past or new updates that we put there around annual monitoring for special education and advanced learning. We would want to provide to you an update on the special ed plan external evaluation. John's working on that RFP right now. We'd want to work with you on that. We would want to provide an update around human growth and development, gender equity, Title IX, and then something related to microschool or opportunity youth could be possible as well. So just a starting place, trying to keep things narrow and tight and focused, but also want to be open to thinking about other ways to receive information.
Gloria, if I may.
Nikki?
I think it's an excellent list. Didn't know there was a due date. I'm sorry, I should have got those in sooner. I kind of joined it with Chris and put them on the giant list because I felt it was easier to do that, and I appreciate that, Chris. But my one thing that I would add would be the special ed funding formula, since we're moving for the pilot to the a widespread formula. I think that have a good discussion on that would be important, because I keep getting questions, and a lot of questions on that. And I think that that would be beneficial, not just to me, but to the community in general, on how it's going to work.
Kelly?
Yeah, so when it comes to operations work group, we're going to remain pretty focused. Budget and referendum planning, long-range facility plan as it relates to the referendum. You see we have a couple other things that we'll need to do throughout the year, working on the Badger Rock Charter, the employee handbook, and a couple policies. But as it relates to the budget, some of those items, kind of Nikki and Chris, that you guys are thinking about will come up very naturally, part of the budget process. We know what's on your mind. We'll be prepared to have the conversations. But versus them being their own meeting, there's structural parts of the budget that will come up very naturally, part of the cycle, the special education pilot and the funding that would be needed ongoing for that will be a natural part of the budget process that you'll see in February or March.
Can I just ask a
So-
follow-up on that?
Nikki, go ahead. Yep.
Just one question, and again, I'm trying to do this because otherwise I get confused if I don't say it out loud. On that, I know the reason why I don't want it to be a whole meeting, but the reason why I wanted it in a meeting, not a written update, one, is to get to the to more people. But number two, the issue on the update is we're going to eventually have to vote on these funding issues, where pathways, as much as we can agree or disagree on it, isn't up for a vote this year, but we're going to schedule a meeting reserved for pathways when we don't have time for something that we're going to vote on. I'm just kind of confused by that, and I'm not trying to be insulting in any way. I'm just confused.
I think that, I think where Nikki is, I think you want to focus on a specific budget.
Okay. I didn't know if mine fit with the,
Because what you're referring to is going to impact budget, and
Okay.
we will talk about that.
that's where I was confused.
Within budget discussions, but I think that on the items that people submitted as far as topics, and if they're a budgetary item that they will come up, maybe we could highlight those. And when we are compiling the list of topics, we can compile that these are going to be budget item discussions that be included in there. Will that help, Nikki?
That would be incredibly helpful, because
Okay.
then I can help stay on track of where I'm at.
Yep.
And that way, the questions don't get nearly as confusing to anyone else,
Jane?
because sometimes I get caught in my head.
I was just going to say, we could maybe treat them like we have the written updates at the bottom and just
Yep.
say these items will be included in budget
Budget.
discussions.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Yep. Ali and Ananda, did you guys understand that?
And I apologize
sense?
for being
Okay.
confusing. I get caught in my own head sometimes.
Okay. All right. Ready?
Okay,
Go
I'll
ahead.
keep going. Anything else, Kelly, you wanted to talk about with operations? Okay. So, we talked a little bit about retreats and, the potential of having retreats, maybe one a semester. And talking a little bit more, in a deeper way around the, long-range facility plan and also ways of working. And also holding a spot perhaps for the new superintendent to have a retreat with the board when he or she joins us at some point in second semester. So we wanted to offer that as some ideas around retreat. And then special meetings, of course, as we've talked before, the superintendent search highlighted in yellow, that will be ongoing. We think that those required voting topics around TID, those will naturally come up, some resolutions, and then updates, any other updates as necessary with recognition, any employee or student discussions that may be in open or closed. Certainly, anything around handbook would be around, those would be good topics for special meetings. So any further comment or thoughts
Gloria, I know I've talked a lot. May I just have one,
Nope. Are you,
just one?
so you've completed the special meetings? Yep, we're done. Okay, let's open it
Just
up for
one
discussion.
quick
Go ahead.
question. I know videotaping, as I was just saying to Kate, is expensive on retreats. Is there a way we could at least like Facebook Live our retreat or something? So I have many individuals with disabilities who are calling saying, we want to participate in the retreat. There's some important things we would like to hear, but we can't get there to watch it, and it's an open meeting, but we physically can't get there. Is there a way we could do that to try and make it accommodating, and that way it would still be cost effective? Is that a possibility?
I think that's part of the planning work we'll need to do with board officers at all, is about where we have meetings, how we have them, et cetera. So we can continue to talk about that.
Yeah, the conversations we've had is, I really like the meetings out in community, but they've been very costly. Some of our schools are not equipped to the technology.
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot of complaints from community that they're not able to hear the conversation. And so Kelly and staff, they're going to do some research on what schools are better and equipped to have, that have the technology that can do this, and then also potentially other locations to do these meetings out there. So it is something we will continue to do, but, and we can add on the board retreats as well.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. Anything, Ananda?
So I didn't get a chance, sorry, Chris, to read your email. But I also sent some things to, I'm curious. There's two things. One is there is something really timely on what Chris put on her email around the SROs removal. And I think if we lose that window and we don't have schedule to have the conversation, I'm not sure, like, when are we having the conversation if we don't schedule to have the conversation? So I'm a little bit confused about that part. And yeah, let me start with this.
SRO. Do you want me to cover that?
Go for it.
So the SRO conversations, we thought we would have at the beginning of 2000, what was it, 20, what did we talk about?
That's
20?
this year. No.
No, 20,
So we were just trying to figure this out this morning, and I think it's a question for us when
Yeah.
we want to have the discussion, but when would we want to implement a pilot of some nature and then backtrack from that, right? And then
Yeah.
set up the discussion so that it leads up to that.
So I think we have to have a discussion about
It's-
that.
Yeah, I mean, I think
About
that's-
when.
about when.
So
just
I think
finalized.
I wanted to have a discussion like next week about when we're having the discussion around the date. Because
That makes sense.
I think that is something we have discussed in lengthy around. I think we have very specific timelines on the contract, and I actually would like to, instead of one person or two people kind of deciding, or us just having like, what do you think the date is? I want to actually have a more robust conversation about this.
Ali?
I think because the contract was such a thoughtful process and such an ongoing and long process that I think it outlines kind of the deadlines for us to make adjustments to the contract, including our ability to terminate the contract after a certain period of time. I think that should just be outlined within the year's schedule to reinforce what we've committed to via the contract. And that way, no matter what decision we make, we're in alignment with what we've agreed to contractually. So I think if we were talking about kind of the earliest pilot, then that decision would have to be made, I believe, in August. So I'm like, is that appearing?
That's not, I mean,
I would
we can
love-
have that
Not
discussion,
the
but we're not,
discussion to make that happen, right?
we have not had this discussion. I mean, that is the discussion we can have.
I think the
But-
contract is the discussion, right? We agreed to a certain contract. The contract gave us a specific outline. We are aware of that outline, and now we are adhering to or interacting with that outline
So do you remember?
based in that contract.
There were two windows, right? It's August and.
January.
Is that?
It was
It was-
end of August, it was start of January.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you
Yep.
remember the exact dates?
Yeah, so there's a notification deadline by September 15th, which if we want to remove one
Matt,
officer.
you have to get to the microphone, please.
There is, the first timeline or deadline is September 15th, 2019, in order to remove.
Somebody from.
Right, starting with the 2021 school year. The second deadline would be, June 15th, so the end of this school year, to remove an officer basically at semester time of, again, the 2021 school year. So we have the opportunity to remove at the beginning of the year or the middle of the year, depending on when we provide notice. Then, if the board wished to terminate the contract entirely, we would have to provide notice by June 15th of 2021, and that would terminate the contract 1 year earlier than its full term. So we would have a 2-year SRO contract as opposed to a 3, which is what the contract allows for now. So, but I think pressing immediately is the September 15th and then the June 15th deadlines.
And then, I'm sorry, what was the date to eliminate the program in its entirety within 2 years versus 3?
Yes, with notice on June 15th of 2021, then we would be able to terminate the contract after the second year.
Thank you,
Yep.
Matt.
Mhm.
So we will have to have a discussion on what our plans are for that at some point, so, yeah. I mean, we are already heading mid-August.
Can we
and
throw it
so-
on the 19th?
The 19th, we have the superintendent.
Can I just say back to you what you just said to make sure that I'm
Sure.
tracking?
Sure.
Okay, so we can make a decision September 15th of this year, so in 4 weeks, to run a pilot in the 2021 academic year. So starting 1 year from now, essentially.
Right, correct.
We can make a decision June 15th, which we would have to calendar as part of this process.
Mhm.
In 2020, to run a pilot of some form in January of 2021.
Right.
And is that the same June that we would make the decision to have a 2-year instead of a 3-year contract?
No, it'd be
It's the year following.
year following, yes.
And then those timelines recycle, so we could also make a decision September 15th, so a year from now, that would then run over.
No, there's no provision for that in the contract. It was essentially, if we wanted to do a pilot, we would have to make that decision during the upcoming academic year. I think the thought is that if we didn't do a pilot, then we'd have that option to just terminate entirely. So that would be a full-scale pilot, because we'd have no SROs should we terminate. So.
I would
Savion?
not say, I'm sorry.
Savion and then Ali.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm. So we pretty much have until next year, June 15th, to run the pilot, or to start a pilot. And then we have up until June 15th, 2021 to eliminate the contract entirely.
Yes, to terminate, yep.
Ali?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say we necessarily eliminate the SROs by ending the contract with the Madison Police Department, just because the Madison Police Department is not the only people who provide police officers or the only people you can contract with. And so I think in terms of how we outline this, there are parts of this that could be competitive in terms of whether or not we want to pursue a relationship with a different entity that would allow for us to pay less while having the police in schools, or have access to a different range of services for students. And so I say that to say, if it does become a situation in which we're looking at multiple vendors, then it's not just about voting on a contract, but also about having a full understanding of our ability to work with law enforcement throughout our community. And I think that creates a larger conversation.
Okay, so we will have 2 more and then I'll close this one.
So It sounds like we essentially have one decision coming in the upcoming year that we have to make, which is in June, because we're not going to make a decision in September on this. And
Why not?
Okay, I mean, we should talk about it. It's 4 weeks from now, so we can talk about whether we want to try to have the amount of kind of input, I think, and planning needed in the next 4 weeks. I would suggest that the reason for doing the pilot was to allow our administrative team and schools time to plan and kind of formulate the way that we work. A different way of working, right? That was the idea, was let's test out a different way of working, but let's actually build the way of working first so that we can enter into a school year with a plan. So that would be the reason I would not recommend making
already
a
have a
decision,
whole bunch here.
you know,
Thank you.
in a couple of weeks' time. Let me say the second part of what I was going to say, and then we can talk about whether folks want to try to make that decision sooner. I am worried about the level of time that went into and has gone into this discussion over the last 2 years has been incredibly material, and our year is our year is really full, and so I just think we need to be very clear on how and what information we want to have as a part of this discussion so that it doesn't become 50% of our year. It's been about 50% of our meetings probably for the last year, and we can't afford to do that this year. And so we just have to be, I think, quite bounded and scoped around how we have this discussion. That would be my kind of offering, and I know that's complicated, but.
Chris? I appreciate the clarification on the timelines and options, and it feels to me like the first conversation we have, and I think we need to have it sooner rather than later, is actually the decision process, more than the actual decision itself. What's the process we're going to follow? What are the things we want to think about? Who's going to be part of that decision? I think that, to me, feels like the first step, and to me, it feels like that needs to happen really soon so that we can decide how we're going to move forward in a unified way.
Thanks, Tavian.
Especially like to see like a systematized process on getting feedback from people in the community and schools.
I want to clarify because I'm not sure I was clear on this. I might have misspoke. So we can cancel the entire contract, and that cancellation date would be June 15th of 2021. And the notice we would need to provide in order to cancel on that date would be September 15th of 2020. So I think I missed that date in my reiteration of the contract. So a year from now, this board would have to decide if they wanted to cancel the contract entirely, and then it would end at the end of that academic year, which would be 2021. So I apologize if I...
Wasn't there a January deadline too on a contract?
The January deadline is in order to, for the pilot. So there's a January, if we want to start, let's see, let me just get back to here. I'm getting my dates confused.
Okay, so, what I'm hearing is we need to have a discussion. So we need to set up another, a meeting, sometime at the end of August, to have a discussion on SROs. And so we'll just have to tackle on another meeting, special meeting for that.
I just want to really be real about our nights this year. We've got like less than 50 Mondays for the next 12 months. And there's one of those sets of Mondays every month, right, is filled up with operations, which is going to be incredibly material this year, and involve a lot of extra meetings on all of our parts in order to push a referendum over the line. So it's going to involve going to PTO meetings, going to community group meetings. Like, there's going to be extra meetings for everybody in this room for at least all of spring, essentially. During that same time window, everybody in this room is going to be participating in a superintendent hiring process where
Barb pulled kindly the last two, and how many meetings that took to get over the line. The last two, one was 10 meetings, one was 16 meetings without community engagement meetings counted. So we're talking about, let's call it 10 to 15 meetings for this group in this room, plus community meetings. That's like 3 months straight of meeting every single Monday night.
Good thing I like everyone.
And then we've got our regular board meetings and instructional work group. I'm just really worried that if we start talking about another incredibly nuanced and public and a topic that needs community engagement at the same time as we're doing these other things, that we are not going to succeed in maybe any of them. So I just, if we start this in August, it's going to kick off work, right? Any process is going to kick off more work, and we don't have more.
Ananda and Ali.
Yeah, so I
Ananda
think-
first.
I'm sorry.
This Ananda. Thank you, Kate, for that. As a single mom, I know very well the sacrifice of evening events. I will say that given the proposed items on the agenda, and particularly BAP, micro school, opportunity youth, and Black excellence, and miss a topic that I would say supersedes all of them, and it's interconnected with all of them. I find it that is extremely important. That I was not planning, and I apologize if that is what's showing up now. I wasn't planning to derail this workshop to talk about this. I was planning to set up a meeting for us to talk about this before the September 15th date, to give us an opportunity to know what is the process.
That makes sense.
I mean, are we voting? I mean, I think that I would like for us to vote on what we're wanting to do for next year, and that's our timeline is September 15th. So I think that's what I'm trying to establish, so we don't take time on this meeting, so we have an opportunity to kind of reflect, meet with the staff, be able to get some other feedback, and be able to have a much more informed conversation. I appreciate you talking about the material impact on each meetings, but I also think that so much of what has taken place over the last 2 years has to do with the fact that we have not been effective on addressing this issue.
Okay, Ali, and then Nikki.
Yeah, so I think that I agree with the idea of having kind of the initial conversation around the pilot in June. Although I think then that still needs to show up in this. And so the fact that it's not here for August or for June is the problem. I think the reason I would move towards having the initial conversation around the pilot in June is because by June, we should have information about the way the officers are interacting with kind of the new expectations of the contract. We also have a lot of data being driven by that contract, and so it gives us an opportunity to reflect in a more informed way about this specific contract. I do think that looking at kind of the timeline for the year, these are all kind of relevant details when we were talking about the contract. So if we were like, this can't happen in August, then we shouldn't have put that deadline in the contract. And I think that is
Excellent.
I think that is a somewhat odd thing, not to have that conversation up front, and be able to embed a different kind of a different timeline in terms of when we're allowed to review the process. That being said, I think it's heavy. The contracts allows us to opt out almost exclusively in the first year. And so I think that having it in June is a necessity in terms of being able to have that conversation and inform that conversation strategically.
Okay, I just want to remind everybody, this is just one topic that, of all the other topics that are going to come up tonight.
I know.
And it's 6 o'clock. So, Nikki, one more time, and then we're going to close this out.
Absolutely. Here's the issue and why I feel that it's important we handle it sooner rather than later. The entire process on the SROs has been filled with a lot of confusion. And I know we've done our best and we are doing our best, but lack of information for people leads to rumors. Rumors lead to confusion. Confusion leads to mistrust, and it leads to problems. What I think we need to do is, if we don't have the rules of the game set out, i.e. what we're going to do, we're going to ask for more confusion because we're going to have to change it on the fly. I don't think that's going to work well for anyone, and then we're going to have people who are going to show their displeasure, whether we like it or not, at any given point in time, because they don't have the information. And in this case, knowledge is power, and I think that we need to set out the rules. We don't have to do this in a whole meeting. We don't have to do it at the group meeting. What we need to do is just say, what are we could even hold a special meeting and just say, what are we going to do? These are the ground rules.
Okay, Nikki, thank you. So I propose that we do have a meeting at the end of August, or sometime beginning of September, to focus on this. Now, we are not this is a meeting solely on the contract language.
Correct.
And what are we going to do moving forward?
Correct.
What's the structure and the process moving forward?
Is this a special meeting? Is this a workshop?
It is. We've done a lot of engagement around this issue. We've done a lot of work around this issue for the past 5 years with community members and so forth. We came up with the contract language, and now we have to discuss the specific contract itself and set up another meeting for us to just focus on that. So Barb will be reaching out to you, or Barb, you'll just schedule that for us. And, okay, all right, let's move forward.
I forgot that. Is that open session?
It is an open session, yep. Special
Sorry
meeting.
about that. Sorry.
Okay. Now, you guys there's some other topics. Now, let's, I think that as you are moving through topics, if Kelly, if you could just say this is going to be covered during the budget, or if it's going to be covered some other way, that would be great. That'll keep us moving along. Chris?
So I have several. Should I just go one topic at a time and let you respond to each one individually, or should I just give them all and then see what the response is?
Let's one by one.
One by one,
Let's
okay.
move through them. Yep.
So this may actually work out well with the budget, but staff morale is up at the top of my list. I heard from staff, I heard from parents that there's serious concerns about the morale of our staff, their pay, their benefits, and the fact that we are seeing more and more staff getting poached into the suburban districts. In addition to that, obviously being a subject of our budget conversation, I know we normally get a November HR report, and there's usually a climate survey report, and that seems like an opportunity for us to talk about staff morale and what's going on, not just in terms of pay and benefits, but in terms of working conditions, and I would like to see that somehow incorporated into the agenda. So that was my
Great.
first one, if you guys want to respond.
Any?
Kelly, go ahead.
I think you kind of answered your own question. I mean, as we always talk about staff, we always talk about benefits. The HR report is coming to the board, and it has the majority of these data points.
Okay, great.
Great. And then I think, Jane, I think there's been some health and wellness work happening, right, within the district, which I was really happy to hear.
Yes,
So-
part of our Leadership Institute. We spent some time looking at the wellness survey, both at the district level and at each school level, and had a lot of substantial discussion over, how we need to support our staff and how we will support our staff. And I think it addresses, that question that, we saw that they had some concerns about that too. And I don't know if Deirdre wants to say anything else about that, but it definitely is on the radar screen.
Great. Okay, next.
Thanks, I really appreciate that, Jen. Retention and recruitment are super important in here, especially recruiting teachers of color. The technology plan is something I'm actually hearing from parents and staff to some degree about, and I know that we have a really packed agenda this year, and this is clearly going to be a budget issue. I'm wondering if there are other ways to ensure that staff and parents have opportunities to give input about how this plan is being implemented and not just the cost and the stuff that we buy. I'm hearing from parents, Lisa and I talked about this, about technology being used as a reward. If you get your academic work done really fast, you can watch a video, and parents don't like that. Concerns about just screen time and young children, concerns about safety and privacy. Is it possible to maybe get an ad hoc committee going with some parents involved, particularly parents who have technology expertise, to address some of these issues that parents are concerned about?
I know TJ has an advisory committee of some sort that's already in place for the technology plan and can certainly share his ideas with him to incorporate into his meetings. Also, there is, the technology plan comes up in that cycle of review that we'll be voting on at the end of the month too, where we'll get a really deeper dive into the data and focus groups. But I hear you, Chris, sort of what kind of input you're getting is also important moving forward.
The next item is in the instruction work group. I feel like somewhere in there we need to be talking about the new reading curriculum that we're going to be funding and piloting, that we just approved a bunch of money to help get in place. In particular, I would love to have a conversation about how we're supporting struggling readers in MMSD, what's working, what's not working, what we're going to change as part of the reading curriculum, with the hope of getting scores up and doing a better job of closing those gaps.
So we will definitely give you updates on. Lisa, your mic's on. Thank you, Barb.
Thank you.
We'll definitely give you updates on that process, how it's going. Actually, the team's been working on that. I've been working with Ethan and Teresa, our new literacy coordinator, around that. And we have some coherent ways of working that we'll be happy to share with you in an update. And then the support for struggling readers. We actually do have on the short list of agendas an update around Opportunity Youth. The state calls that at risk, but we're calling it our Opportunity Youth work, and we do plan to bring that conversation back with approval of that plan.
I just want to clarify, because our Opportunity Youth work tends to be focused on secondary, and this reading question is really like young children, which I know are included in the state definition of at-risk or Opportunity Youth, but I want to make sure that this isn't just a secondary conversation.
Definitely, yep, I hear you. And as part of the materials process, if I were a betting person, I think one of the very first things that we are going to be looking at is a research-based foundational skills curriculum that we will be taking a look at. So we will give you updates along the way about the charge, about what we're working with. You'll see an RFP come forth for materials, so you will see all kinds of, we just want to be sure that we're keeping you updated with how that's going, because it's a big deal for us.
It's a big deal for the board too, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Let's see. I had some feedback about testing. People who just wanted, to get an updated list of all the tests that kids are taking, given that we're trying to back off of standardized testing a little bit. I think it would be good to just clarify what's on the agenda for testing this coming year. And then there were some places in the strategic plan where we kind of left placeholders on testing. One was finding a replacement for PALS, and one was what major we're going to use for map growth. And I think we need to address those sooner rather than later, so.
You are asking a great question. Jane and I and Caroline actually had a long talk about that.
Very cool.
The work that we've been doing to refresh the comprehensive assessment system is work that we did with a large group of teacher stakeholders and principal stakeholders with the Achievement Network. They worked with us at a systems level, and we are happy and actually excited to share with you some of the things that we've already taken off for teachers. We've already given them back instructional minutes. We've taken 3 standardized tests off. We've actually landed on a new progress monitoring tool, and we've landed on a recommendation for a new kindergarten readiness screener. So we're happy to share those. It is, of course, a process to get those moving. It involves professional development. Whenever you pull something out, like a PALS replacement, and you put something in, we want to be thoughtful about how that happens and how it's implemented. So we actually have a really great project plan around that we are happy to share in the next coming months with some of those decisions and next points that we'll be working our way into. Some of those haven't been decided yet, but we will certainly be able to provide a timeline for how, like if and when there is a MAP replacement or not. Like MAP is actually doing some work to re-norm, and we're kind of waiting to see how that looks. So we'll give you a summary on that. I'm really glad you asked, because it's a really important work stream.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's really helpful. class size. I know a couple times a year they're supposed to be reporting to the board just on how many classes are out of compliance with the class size policy, and I'm just wondering if, like, sometimes we have short discussions at meetings, and if, in addition to getting those reports, we could have a discussion, particularly focused on class size at our high poverty schools, where we know small class sizes can make the biggest difference. I don't know if there's any need to respond to that one.
We'll provide the class size report. We follow our class size policy. It's obviously designated by AGR, former SAGE schools, and non-AGR schools. So we adhere to that policy, and we'll provide the report as that policy specifies.
Great. Secondary conversations, I'm a little worried that middle school is slipping through the cracks here. And I want to make sure that we talk about what's going on in our middle schools, what we're doing to try to improve outcomes in our middle schools, not just academically, also socially and emotionally. So let's make sure that gets on the agenda. I'm curious about why we chose the policies that we chose to review this year. And one of the reasons for that concern is that I strongly believe that one policy we need to revisit is our non-discrimination policy, for the reason that we've got basically a zero tolerance policy for racial slurs right now, which we have not dealt with in terms of free speech. And I'm concerned that we actually need to look at the line between, like, hate speech and protecting the ability to use text and not censoring in the district through policy. I think the board needs to address that this year if we're going to continue with that. And I'd actually like to get Matt's response to that.
Yeah, I believe that policy was revised, I'm just looking it up right now, within the last couple of years. When I was selecting the board policies that made it onto the list, they were based upon policies that had not been revised in a significant amount of time, policies that had to be revised in order to be compliance with Title I, policies that had to be revised in order for student records. There's no reason why we can't revise the non-discrimination policy. It's just that it had a fairly recent revision, and these were somewhat taking more precedent. So,
I just feel that given our increasing issues with staff hates, basically racial slurs being used in our schools, we need to actually clarify when,
sure.
Making sure we're not censoring. To make sure we're also not using hate speech in the district.
Who's our policy people?
I'm the only, Kate and I are the only two left on that committee. Oh, sorry.
Okay, so maybe the two of you could review this with Matt.
I'd love to.
And then if you guys feel like it needs to come back to the board, then bring it back to the board.
Yep.
Great.
And I was somewhat waiting to reach out to both of you till after tonight to figure out the schedule for a policy revision, so.
And I think while we're at it, we should also fix the board replacement policy so that it's not illegal anymore. Probably quick.
The
but
secret
since-
ballot is
Since we
illegal.
just did it, we might as well fix it.
The secret ballot is illegal under state law.
Finally, I think, there's always comment, particularly in June, that our budget process needs to be revisited. I think we need to revisit our budget process to make sure that we're not struggling in June with questions that we could have addressed earlier on. So just making sure that early in the budget process, we're making sure that we have a process where we're getting particularly decisions about pay and benefits made in a way that we're not, like, up against a wall by the time June rolls around.
I totally agree with that, Chris. I think we could stage it differently than we, and I think we did a good job kind of laying out the assumptions this year. But it will be more stark in the coming year, and that we can kind of have that dialogue. So I think that's a good question.
Yeah, and I think it's always hard because it always lands in around election, turnover, board. So it's always a challenge for staff and board to work through that. So, okay. Sounds good. Are you okay? Thank you. Nikki.
The ones that I would like to focus on is as I said before, was the special ed funding formula. If we're going to change the funding formula in special ed, I think we need to not just hear from the parents of kids who are going to be infected, but I think the board needs to look at the policy as is, since we're moving from the pilot from Memorial, and there's talk of expansion. I would like to look into that, if that's all right. and then I'm just going to list them. Title IX compliance, because very simply, we're hearing from our students that on gender, we feel powerless. We don't know what we can do. Is there something that protects us? Well, I want to make sure our policies are up to date. I want to make sure that their voice is preserved and heard instead of just saying, well, we hear you, we stand with you. No, I want to make sure we're able to do something. And I think that's really an important thing. The third one is on health education. I keep hearing sex ed is late middle school to high school. And I'm thrilled that West is now handing out condoms. Thank you, G-Safe. I appreciate. Thank you very much. Oh, well, I thought it was you. I apologize. But I am very much a fan of that. But I'd like to focus on exactly when we start teaching sex ed, and it may need to be sooner. I missed it then? Okay,
Yeah.
I missed it.
And there, right.
Because I am worried about that. Then my last two are a non-verbal screener for kindergarten especially, because again, and there are people who very well can learn, they just can't speak. That doesn't mean that they can't communicate. We don't always understand how they communicate, but that's on us, not on them. And so I think that's necessary. And then the last one, and this is going to sound odd, but I think we need a public comment, since we're discussing the athletic proposal, on whether or not we comment on WIAA procedures. And the reason I say that is there's currently a procedure right now that if you are charged with a felony, not convicted, charged, you lose all eligibility until you pay all restitution, even if you haven't paid it, just to be charged with a crime, which is clearly against the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. And I want to know, does the board take an issue on those stances or not?
You're asking the board, if the board takes it.
Yeah, like, can we issue a resolution saying we agree, we don't agree?
We could, and that would have to be a discussion, but it's not.
Right, I just wanted to know, I never knew how it was done.
Oh, yeah, you can bring it up, Nikki, anytime, and we can.
Okay,
we need-
that I just didn't know how it was
just have
done.
to discuss it as a board. Matt, did you have to? Did you wanna-
No,
Okay.
just to add that would be an issue we could also address through revision to the athletic policy or the athletic code, so.
I just want to say, I thought, Nikki, you brought up Title IX as something that we wanted
Yes.
to be in greater compliance with, and I thought we had some of the discussion during the
In terms of, I think in particular, the curriculum around health and wellness, there is definitely a committee being headed up by Jay Affelt right now, reviewing that to try and find the gaps that you're talking about of when do we teach specific topics and do we have consistency and are they developmentally appropriate and those areas. So that's being addressed. The other, we just presented to the principals on Title IX Thursday. And there is also a liaison program where we are providing training that is jointly done between the district and the Rape Crisis Center, where we're training Title IX liaisons in each of the middle and high schools.
That's what I
So
want.
there is a point person, so students can have a greater voice and can go to that person and know who to go to. So that those movements are afoot, yes.
Ali, there is not currently a time scheduled for us to discuss it. Both
Ah,
of those are
yeah.
written updates right now in this document
Yeah.
as planned. So we would get a written update from administration,
Mm-hmm.
but not have time to discuss
Right.
unless we want to change that.
So I wouldn't necessarily shift Title IX in terms of a written update, and I think Title IX exists in a pretty interesting place right now between the Supreme Court and the Seventh Circuit, and since the Seventh Circuit is informing Wisconsin, I think we're in a pretty good place, and we should stay where we're at and progress as a district. For the health kind of curriculum approach or human growth and development, I think that we should shift that to a conversation as a board, particularly because of kind of issues we've had in terms of being able to inform kids around what is consensual and what is not throughout their education. And so I think looking at some of kind of what shaped
want to add one more thing with regard to Title IX that Mike just reminded me of. We are currently doing audits of our athletic facilities in our 4 high schools to determine compliance with Title IX in terms of equity of athletic participation and opportunities for all students. So that is ongoing as well.
I would like an update on that as well.
Okay.
I will say, connecting Title IX, what Chris was saying in terms of our discrimination policies, is that we are a trans inclusive district, so our policies around discrimination reinforce the South Circuit's interpretation of Title IX, and so I think if there's curiosity around like the protections we're extending and whether or not they're consistent with the way we're navigating facilities, my understanding is that we're pretty consistent.
My issue is on how, I want people to know what the rights are if they have a complaint. I want them to know what the process is, and I think every student should know that, and I don't think everyone does know that.
Okay, Ananda?
So there were a couple items, and I know Lisa, you and I have been talking about around, I think I heard this as a theme when we were looking at measuring partners' outcomes, in particular the Urban League and Zimbabwe's final. But around how are we capturing the billions of our students beyond like our mainstream data points? I'm not sure, but I just wanted to make sure that I put that on record. I know it's something that is in your radar as well. And the other piece is around a set of policies that encompass Act 31, and I just sent it to you all, like a very specific excerpt around the board's putting forward educational goals around understanding different value systems and cultures in all grade levels, understanding human relations, particularly with regards to American Indians, Black Americans, and Hispanics as a term used by state and federal level, but Latinx students. And I think Act 31, in particular this statute, relates to the Black excellence and so many other items. And I know Ethan attended the Summer Institute, and we probably have got some fresh ideas as well, but I want to figure out like how to, I just want to say one more thing around how I frame Black excellence, and I'm not speaking as a board collectively, like that's how I envision the work around Black excellence. Is not an exclusion of other groups, right? I think Black excellence is very much about centering around Indigenous understanding and Latinx work and Hmong work and other immigrants. So yeah, it would be an opportunity to sort of lead into some of the work that you already kind of laid out and be compliance with the state regulations as well.
Okay. Any questions that you guys, okay, Savion, did you have something?
Yes, we get a BEP update and kind of figure out the SRO timeline. Is there a way that we can kind of get a update or find ways to get an update on restorative justice programs in schools, or find ways to embed those principles and practices throughout the district?
Okay. Anything else? Kate?
Yeah, so I have kind of two like questions for us that I just kind of want to talk about. The first is, do we need everything here? I think we need everything in the operations work group, given that it's essentially just budget and referendum, but is there anything that we see in a different column, right, either in our regular board meetings and instruction, that we don't think we need all of us to talk about, right, that could be moved into a written update, or just given priorities this year, we want to be more focused versus less? Or that we think is less important than something we just talked about? Because I haven't heard anything we've just talked about that we've added for a
Community schools
discussion.
community schools could be a written report. I mean,
I agree with that, yeah. I'm just curious,
yeah, I
like,
don't-
I just want to, I want to be able to create space because we just had a rich discussion. We are at least adding SROs once, and that will likely create more meetings, and more energy. So just, if there's things we can pull off. I don't know if you have recommendations of.
The community schools will come up as part of the budget conversation. So the idea of it being on instruction here was so that instructionally, you can tie that part into the strategy and the vision of the district moving forward, kind of before you make a budget conversation, because it's meant to be an instructional strategy. So that's the reason why it's here, but it will certainly come up as part of the budget as well.
So we could treat it the same way as some of Chris's commentary around kind of items that feed into the budget?
That's what the special ed pilot is.
I mean, we don't
So-
need, I'm curious if there's things that
Yeah,
the group
so,
has.
you're saying the special ed too?
The special ed pilot, sort of how that went, how it affected allocation, how the process went, that would certainly be part of our pre-budget conversation as we make decisions about expanding or not, or what we learned.
I would like, can we put that with the micro school as well and put both of those together?
I think micro school may well be part of the budget as well.
Right, so,
I mean,
I mean-
I think what we have here, right, is really our items that often come up during budget time where we need that extra sort of understanding, because I think on some of these, we can't wait until the budget, right? And so, that's why when it comes to, the special education, community school, I'm just concerned as if we wait, we won't be prepared to make unless you feel that maybe community school could be taken out, but I think all of these items, seriously, are very important, right? Everything that Chris laid out, everybody's laid out here today, all very important. It's just, how do we strategize around, if items are gonna be part of the budget, that's great. I think that there are some items that are gonna be perfect. We'll be able to bring ourselves up to speed, but there are some that are just so expansive. And I think with community school, with everything that's happening out there, with, our Foundation for Public Schools are, really invested, and other community stakeholders, this is something that we won't be ready to wait until the budget time to have that discussion. Kelly, did you want to say something?
I mean, I would agree with that. I think if you leave too many of the big rocks for the January through March timeline at that same time that you're trying to gear up for the referendum, and as you're trying to work through the superintendent process, you're pushing a lot off to a really busy period of time. I would recommend taking some of these bigger discussions, kind of as Lisa just said, the pre-budget work, and thinking about what are the big conversations you're having between September and December on big rocks that are instructionally part of our strategy. That's community schools, that's micro schools, that's opportunity, youth in particular. Those are the reasons why they're here. For the special education pilot, it's a bit different because it's new. We actually need more time to get it implemented before we can all talk about how it's going. Like, October is way too early. September 3rd is the first day it gets started. So we have to wait a little bit longer for then. So it does fit more naturally into the budget process because it's going to be February, March before we can even really report out and talk to you about it.
And so we're talking about the weighted.
It's an allocation model. That is the reason why it's embedded in the budget.
Right, and we've already piloted that, and so we're talking about the pilot and the expansion of the pilot simultaneously.
Right, so we will start the implementation of that weighted formula first semester. We haven't started it yet. We just talked about it. We decided on the attendance area, so we already used the formula to allocate differently in that attendance area, but we won't know how it works until we actually have kids in school, services being delivered,
Okay.
resources being shifted as needed. Yeah, so we need to give that a chance to.
So,
Kate, you were still, sorry. you were
yeah,
still
no,
on
I just
yours.
wanted
And then
to, I mean,
Chris.
the big idea behind the question was, is there a way for us to kind of create space? And then the second question, and maybe there isn't, I think one thing that I've seen over the last couple of years for us is that it often takes us to work group discussions to really make progress on a topic, sometimes more. But so just as I look at what I see here, I mean, I see 6 topics plus policy under instruction, and that's 12 meetings to make real progress on any of them if it's not just a report. So if it's just going to be a report, we could have that at the regular board meeting with no discussion. But for a topic that we want to engage with, I haven't seen us really make progress without having multiple meetings. And to just want to calibrate all of us on the amount of time if we want to do something well where we need, but also, you know, that means basically you guys share with us your best work. We ask a bunch of questions. You go back and answer those questions. We then tackle it again. And then there's an outcome and a plan and kind of, so just to kind of pace us out there. The second question, which is similarly related to timelines and timing, I'm curious if we want to almost front load our instructional topics this year so that we can create more space for operations and referendum discussions and superintendent hiring discussions in the January through March timeline. Our superintendent process really ramps up there, and particularly from a community forum and input perspective, interviews, and so I'm almost curious about like swapping some operations work groups or trading out so that we can kind of intentionally hold more space for ourselves in Q1, which would be a little different than we've done it before, but it might create some boundaries for us to do really strong work during a period of time that our community needs us to be really available. So that was another idea that I just wanted to throw out there and would require these guys scheduling a little differently and us being willing to not then fill the space, because we also have a tendency to fill the empty Mondays. So if we ask like a really interesting question in November and we're like, let's put that on instruction in January, and we protected that Monday, we have to all hold ourselves accountable to use it for the intended purposes. Just a thought.
Okay,
I know you
we
were
have
making a
Ana-
face, Kelly.
Ananda.
You're making a face, so maybe you
There are just some legal requirements that
Yeah,
are built
we should
into
do the
Operation
things-
Work Group that
We should, I'm
we
not.
need to make sure we're not
Yeah.
removing
Usually if I'm
Operation
getting
Work
rid of
Group.
meetings, you're happy.
I am normally happy, but we do need to make sure we meet,
We'll do the
right?
legal things.
For,
Yeah.
like, we have to
We'll do the legal
approve our
things.
budget for this current operating year, so we can't just take them off.
So I think for, I see what you're saying, Kate, being very strategic and like
I'm
trying
just
to.
trying to
and,
protect us.
Yeah, I know. But I also like the feeling of the consistency, right? We are moving along, right? Despite the changes, the transitions, the decisions that we're doing. I like the consistency. And, I mean, not only for me, but also the community, right? I mean, I think our community, they get used to our instruction and operations meetings, and I just feel like changing that, may shake things up a little bit too much. I'm open to see, what that could look like without sort of taking us off course completely, but I do like the consistency, particularly when there's a lot of change and a lot of things happening. Ananda, Chris, and then Nikki.
So what I was going to suggest is along the lines what Kate was talking about, how do we upfront some of the instructional items. I'm wondering if it's also, and I don't know, Kelly, you tell me otherwise, that maybe what I'm hearing you say is that the operations meeting may be a little skinnier, the agenda may be a little skinnier. So I'm wondering if we can assign specifically instructional topics the same night that we have the operations work group. So we'll have like in a course of a month, we will have 2 instructional group, but one will be shorter because we're the same day as the shorter operations group.
It may just be 1 month that we're, like, it could be just February that we decide we want to, not have an instruction work group. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. So and then the other one is around the policy parts of the instructional group. I'm wondering if and I don't know how it was done before, like how it was timelined before. If the policy committee at first do their own work and then send to recommendations to the instructional work group.
That's how it was done before.
Right? So I see there's like a lot of them in there, but they don't necessarily mean that they're items in an instruction group. They will be already almost baked by the time it gets to the board meeting for revision. Is that correct?
We wrote the policies and then we would bring them to the board to see if the board was interested in updating and accepting that or putting any changes in the policy. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I was just trying to get back.
That's fine, Nikki, thank you. Did you get your,
That's it.
okay. Chris?
So Kate, I really appreciate your asking this question. And when I look at this chart, side to side, I noticed that our retreat section is actually kind of lean. Like we have, we clearly need to do a deep dive into the long-range facilities planning and the referendum. However, ways of working is, that's not a whole retreat. I'm wondering if some of the instructional stuff we do could maybe get moved into a retreat conversation. Like, could we do a retreat focused on curriculum and instruction, where we talk about the reading updates, where we talk about math curriculum, where we talk about what we're doing at the middle school level, where we talk about the future of pathways, and talk about the micro schools and the curriculum there, and get some of that work done at the retreat so we don't have to spend as much time on it in instruction work group meetings. Another possible way to make good use of retreat time would be to focus a retreat thing on restorative justice, the BEP, and EROs, and actually have a significant chunk of time to grapple with that really important conversation that our community actually cares about a lot. So I think trying to make the most of our retreat time could alleviate some of the crunch in the meeting, free up time for the superintendent search, for the referendum, and for the budget, which are going to be huge rocks.
And I think that's, I love retreats, but I think that we only have, we can have as many as we want. Really, it's really up to us. I think they were quarterly. I just don't know.
There was 3 in the last 2 years.
So they're
A
not
while
like
ago we
a
had 4, but we
regular-
haven't had 4 in a long
yeah.
time.
They're not, they don't come around too often, I guess, is what I'm saying. So, we could add on some of these onto the retreats, definitely.
I think that would work well.
Nikki?
And one additional thing, and I know Kate wants to get work off the plate, and I know everyone else does, and I'm the nerd, and so, no, you guys are more focused, but I do have one request. However, I know that it'll probably be met with some skepticism. On the pilots, I would like the board to at least not just know about the pilots, but at least have some say in them. I don't think we need a vote necessarily, but I do think we need some say in deciding how many pilots we do, because it takes a lot of our staff, it takes a lot on our resources, it takes a lot on our professional development, and I think that might take some of the burden off admin, might take some of the burden off our teachers. But that's my 2 cents.
Great. Ali?
Yeah, so I think one of the complex things about moving parts of the instructional work group into the retreat is that the retreats are less accessible to community participation, and particularly when we're talking about things that disproportionately impact certain demographics of people, right? And so if you make those things unavailable or more unavailable to people to participate in, or you sandwich those things into an 8-hour day in which a person is hanging out waiting to be able to speak to a singular thing, I think that could feel really hard. I also think that having kind of just the structure that we have currently, in which we're, both talking about instruction and operation in parallel, having kind of a more holistic approach to education on an ongoing basis and allowing people to chime in is relevant to people feeling represented and heard. I do appreciate kind of talking about like the intensity of the next year. I don't think there's anything we could do right now in terms of rearranging like work group meetings that would alleviate the level of intensity that some of the work will be, sincerely. And I also think that we might be anticipating or imagining a scarcity of time in places where it doesn't exist. And so that is my opinion on this particular like kind of fluctuation of where we're placing things at this current moment.
Great. Well, I think that, it sounds like we've explored the topics that the board have been, brought to the table, and we figured out ways in which we're going to incorporate that into the discussion. And I think that if there are things that are on our list that did not make it to the budget discussion or anywhere else, that we find some other opportunity to bring that up. And I think from what I'm hearing, I think, Kate, thanks for bringing that up. I think it is, for us to be more focused, in order for us to stay and remain focused and consistent, is we remain with what's, in front of us. Keep the instruction, keep the operations, and we just know that what's fell on our lap, right, is a lot of extra meetings, and we're just gonna have to do that. And this is not, this is not set in stone, right? If something comes up, then we need to. We can change it, and so we'll just move along. This is something we are putting together. We're moving forward, so we have a guide. We'll try to stick to that, but if we need to move things around, add things, we'll do that. But I think that we've covered pretty much all the topics here tonight. We'll add that extra meeting for the SRO contract discussion. And then,
Can I just
Sure.
Superintendent
yes, yep.
So maybe just, again, a preview of the next couple of weeks. So the RFP for superintendent search firms has been out for almost a month. We expect all responses by the 15th at 2 p.m. We as a group will have until the 19th, that Monday, to review those RFPs, come back with them scored using the rubric that was essentially laid out in the RFP. But we'll have a form to do that in, and then there will be another meeting set up that Barb is setting up before the 9th to host interviews with finalists. So we will have there's two discussions over the next essentially 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks to do that as well, and then we will have a partner in crime, hopefully, a partner to support our superintendent search process, which will help accelerate that process significantly. So it's the other meeting that will be appearing on your calendars that Barb is reaching out on.
And, yeah.
It already is there.
So you all will have to do some of your own work, in looking through the RFPs, and
That was beautiful.
and moving and making, grading them essentially, and then we'll come back as a group. So, thanks, Kate, for taking the lead on that.
Deirdre and the
And
team.
Deidre and the team
Mike
for helping us out through this, Matt. So, okay, moving on. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly, Lisa, Matt. We'll go ahead, do the equity tool?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, you
So
guys can go on your own, that's fine.
Deirdre and Nichelle are going to talk us through the equity.
Yeah, can you hurry and come in?
Well, sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, Deidre's going to give us a little history
Yeah.
on this.
So now that you guys are sufficiently tired and ready to go home, we'll talk about the equity tool. So I just want to give just a real quick sort of history of the document that you're looking at now. And apologies, I think there was the wrong document that was initially uploaded. So
Oh, okay, so
so
yeah.
we've got the right one.
Did you hand that one out?
Yeah, I
We've
think
got
Barb handed it out.
Okay.
So, obviously, you all know that we've had an equity policy for the last several years. And I think our team has really been grappling with a tool and the right tool that we can use that would really support the district really enacting this policy. So we've had a tool that we've used for a couple of years that we wanted to bring back and really revise. So we spent some time creating this document. We've gotten feedback from the combined advisory groups, the Teachers of Color, our SLT group. You all had an opportunity to look at this at the retreat. And so we're just looking for some guidance and some direction from you in terms of being able to enact and use this policy. So I'm going to let Michelle just talk a little bit about the actual tool and some of the ways that we think we're gonna put it to use.
Yes, so in addition to what Deirdre just said, a little bit of context, as you already know, in the actual policy, under the procedure part of the policy, there's language that says educational equity tool. The superintendent or his or her designee shall recommend, and the board shall adopt a tool and or a method by which the district can assess alignment of recommendations with the principles in the educational equity policy, parentheses, educational equity tool. The educational equity tool shall be available on the district's website once approved. So what we're bringing forward today is, oh, do you need me to repeat all of that? Okay. So the policy already references a tool that will be used as a way, a method, a process for all of us at the board level and then also within the district to start to really make more equitable decisions. So what we
And the policy link is right.
and the policy is linked on
Board
this
docs.
part of the agenda.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
So what you have in front of you is kind of our best version of the tool. The tool was drawn from other resources that we know exist. So for instance, we know Seattle, the city of Seattle has an entire racial equity toolkit with very similar steps and processes. We know the city of Madison has also developed a racial and social justice toolkit. And the tool really is about how do folks stop, ask these questions, bring forth due diligence to be as inclusive, to really think about who's being engaged, what perspectives have been missing, how do you bring them in, and really walking your way through the variety of steps before you just go and make a decision. And so what we're hoping for is being able to, if you have confidence in the tool, being able to adopt it or approve it as the policy says the board will. And then our plan for this year, because I know there have been some questions about potentially the rollout, meaning what would be some of the training, who would be using the tool. Some of that is yet to be developed in the very short horizon. So, we feel like there's already great examples of toolkits, guidance documents, process forms that other folks have created that we can draw upon. We have a couple of departments that have agreed to pilot using this tool. So Deirdre would like to be able to pilot using the tool through the handbook process. I know our department will be using this tool, like especially around the Black Excellence funding. And our hope would be that the board would also if we feel like the tool is pretty inclusive of the right steps to take, may also want to pilot using the tool in some decision-making this year. Then we think, given that it's out in the field, we're using it, we're learning from it, then if we need to refine, we can do that. So all we have tonight is the tool, accompanying documents, and more of a kind of a training and support plan is being developed in the next few weeks.
Sorry. Make some mistakes.
My quick question is, I don't have a problem with the tool. I think the tool is a good idea. I do worry that we don't have our own accompanying documents with it, because Madison is a unique community. As nice as Seattle's program is and other cities are, they're not Madison, and I want to make sure that our supporting documents, which I know are coming, please don't get me wrong, are going to be tailored to Madison, not just taken and said, oh, it'll work here because it works somewhere else.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. I think being able to use the handbook process as part of that learning is critically important, right? So we'll have several subcommittees that'll be working this tool, and it is the intent for us to learn and add and refine and revise as we move forward. So appreciate the comment.
Great. Ananda, did you have something?
I didn't raise my hand, but
Oh,
I
I'm
will
sorry.
say. I'll say.
I saw it coming.
Grab my mic. No, I apologize
sorry,
because
that
I
was you.
wasn't able to get intimate with the newest version. And I can't, I wanted to hear you, so I can't do both, like, and I would need like a little bit more time. The things that I had commented last night are laid out.
Sorry.
We are healthy.
I'm just having an allergy attack,
No,
I'm sorry.
It's a ragweed season. We're all like kind of, they are laid out here. Yeah, no, I don't have I don't have a particular comment right now, not because I don't have any comments about it. It's just because I haven't got a chance to really lay it out. But I appreciate the work, and I appreciate the revision, and I also appreciate the fact that you're seeing this document as a living document, as something organic that is also flexible to whatever question you're trying, or decision making that you're trying to address.
Great. Chris?
I really appreciate the work that has gone into this tool. I would just love to hear a little bit more about when we would use this tool, like the kinds of decisions that we would apply this tool to, because I know we're not going to use it for everything we decide, so.
Yeah, well, when we had an opportunity to talk to the combined advisory groups, they had a whole list of ideas, budget being one of those. Handbook came out of that combined advisory discussion, the handbook process. I think when you're looking at policy, certainly, other policy, when we're looking at particular applications or ways of working within a department, you could certainly utilize this this tool. So I think those are some examples. You may have additional ones.
I would say the same thing. I mean, I think even the conversations that I've heard you all having around a long-range facility plan, or the monies that you all approved in June for Black Excellence, the conversations we had even earlier around community schools. Like, what I remember in many of your comments was, how do we actually know we're having impact? How do we know the very students that we were saying are the furthest from opportunity, who have the most marginalized experiences, have been thought of critically? And how do you go about that with due diligence? And so I think this tool for us helps try to provide a visual and some of the questions that should be not an afterthought, but in the forefront of decision making. And you know, we're going to practice using the tool so that we become more, I think, sophisticated in our own understanding. And we also, I mean, I think the great thing is that we have folks that have been doing this work who are right here in our own community. So the city of Madison rolled out a toolkit and a process a few years ago. Not to name drop, but I know Ananda is also doing work across the state in addressing like disparities. And so, there are folks who have been using tools like this. And I think that, our collective work is to also draw upon the wisdom in our community about how do we actually attend to the impact of our decisions.
So just as a follow-up to that, and I appreciate that information, I'm trying to wrap my head around like big decisions, like the budget or the handbook, and how you would apply this tool to something like that. Would you actually like chunk it out into smaller decisions and like be applying the tool to sub-problems, like to solve problems in that process? Because I can't see running the whole budget through an equity tool. If you could just provide, like, especially the handbook, I'm curious how this tool would apply to the handbook process.
Yeah, so the way that we're thinking about it, there's certainly language provisions in the handbook that we're focused on taking a look at, right? And so when you look at this process, the initial language that's already laid out in the handbook, there's ways that we want to change language. There's certainly data that's connected to why it is that we would think that we would want to change specific language in a handbook. Having community engagement is really working through the subcommittee and the larger committee process, asking those very specific questions around who is benefiting from the current language and who may be benefiting or burdened with the proposed language is one way of thinking about it. And then moving through implementation, right? So there's an opportunity for us to then change the language. Once language is changed and we move through implementation, then there's a series of questions that we could certainly be asking ourselves around that implementation plan, which certainly circles back up to data collection. Is this the right language changes, and we keep moving it forward. So that's sort of a rough example of how you could take it through the handbook process, and using data to really help inform, because I think right now, and we've sort of evolved, but you could certainly have language changes that are proposed that really don't have that sort of robust conversation behind it, and that's what we're trying to get to. I think the other thing that's really important for us when we talk about this tool in particular is to be sure that we're not thinking about, and we've gone through several iterations, this isn't a checklist. This is not for you to go down the list and say, okay, I've checked it off. This is really about moving through a process, to Nichelle's point, to really make sure that those that are farthest away or not situated are being considered, and everyone that's impacted, their voice is heard. So I think it's just important to reiterate that. So is that, does that help, Chris, in terms of an example?
That is helpful. Thank you very much.
Ally?
Yeah, so I appreciate the document. I think the portion of the document that's the most interesting to me is the benefit and burden, and I think there is kind of the plus or negative or what needs to be changed. I think that is an opportunity for us to kind of examine the areas of disproportionality that are not based in kids of color, right? So when we talk about disproportionality, we focus on the experiences of kids of color. We do not talk about the areas of the district that are disproportionately white and affluent, right? So we don't talk about the swim team as an expression of inequity on a regular basis, right? And when we do, we talk about it from the lens of exclusion versus the lens of overrepresentation, right, of certain groups of people, and what that says, or how that sets certain kids up for opportunities and not others. I do think that the hardest thing for me to reconcile with this tool specifically is that it doesn't acknowledge any sort of inequity tool. So how do we have a systematic approach to inequity, and how do we have a sense of truth and reconciliation that we have produced inequity over and over again, and we've done so using specific tools and strategies, and this tool doesn't get us to that space, and so I think talking about equity or talking about racial justice or restorative justice in kind of this vacuum doesn't help. And simultaneously thinking through kind of the configuration of this meeting and who is talking and who is talking about what. I think that we could kind of end up recreating solutions or charging the same people with creating solutions that we have in the past. And I think that's actually in and of itself an expression of inequity. So I think the tool allows for us to be ambitious and considerate and mindful, and simultaneously, I don't know if this tool gives us a space to acknowledge the ways in which inequity is embedded in our work. And so I guess I'm wondering about your thoughts on that. How does this tool allow for us to reconcile inequity in the moment? How does it change the conversations we're having about inequity? And how does it allow for us to reconcile a long history of producing inequitable outcomes for young people?
I mean, can I just respond? I mean, I think that, what comes to my mind is like advanced learning, right? I mean, I think that when you take a tool like this and you talk about the processes and the instruction of advanced learning, it really does, when you ask these questions, it takes you to the inequities in the process. And that's where I see tackling the inequities, right? But that just comes to mind for me right away. Michelle, you got something?
Yeah, and I was just going to add, I mean, of course, I'm saying this without us having actually implemented at this point, but that stage around community engagement, to me, is a place where if you are truly listening, if the folks who have been impacted historically are sharing what their perceptions are, what their lived experience has been, their children, their grandchildren, like everybody involved, and they're telling you, like, and even if the district were the facilitator of that conversation, right, and we were saying, oh, but we've done this and we've done that, but the families are like, oh, I never saw it, felt it, knew it. So I don't know what you guys think you're doing, but we're not feeling the benefit. I think if you are like I don't want to sound like, kind of out there, but like if you take community engagement and bringing people together and really holding that as like a sacred experience, and it is your job to then take what has been shared and actually feed it in and really hold yourself accountable, and whatever other stakeholders you're bringing to the table as decision makers, you hold that as an accountability piece around this is what people have said, and how are we actually really like reconciling, and where do we how far can we push this? And I think even with when we did our Black Excellence update, right, there were several comments from board members around like, oh, we would have thought there would have been something bolder, right? Like we know that there has been history here around Black students in this district and the impact on families as well. And I think even in the process of bringing voice together, I could hear it, but trying to figure out what the middle ground wasn't necessarily representative of every perspective, right? And I certainly didn't use an equity tool in terms of a known process, right? I think there were intuitively some pieces that we did, but didn't necessarily incorporate all of it. But my point is to really, I think to get to the inequities and to be really pushing in on that reconciliation, the community engagement piece and how we continue to push in on that is super important to me in the process.
Which is why the intentional kind of weaving in of community engagement at and through every sort of phase of the process being really important, right? Because getting that feedback all along the way, I think is sort of addressing or could potentially address some of those issues.
I think for me, this is an issue of scale, and I by no means expect the equity tool to, correct all of inequity in our district.
Right.
That being said, I think when we're talking about addressing inequity, oftentimes the scale of it feels disproportionate to the problem. And I think when we create inequity as a society, we ramp it up. We invest in it. We spend millions of dollars on prisons or detention centers for immigrants. It's kind of a full speed ahead effort when we're talking about inequity in our society. And when we're talking about equity, we seem to have a slower approach and an approach that I don't know speaks to the scale of the issue. And so I'm like, what we run through the equity tool is relevant, obviously, but our ability to identify inequity and address inequity as a result of this tool is kind of where there's the missing link for me. So I'm thinking, what allows for us, what's the cue to say, we're gonna look at this with the equity tool? When do we say, this doesn't seem equitable? It wasn't on our radar, but because of the equity tool, it got on our radar, and we need to run it through this tool. And so what do those, how are we managing our own blind spots in terms of equity, in terms of the utilization of this tool? How are we managing the scale, and how do we utilize this tool to do more and to do what we haven't done before?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think the focus around data sort of speaks a little bit to that, right? So when we're looking at data all across the district and we've identified something that is an inequity, it should be a signal to us to say, should we, yes, move it through this tool? And we have data all over the place, right? We have plenty of opportunities to dig into and see the inequities and use this tool as an opportunity for us to run those through this process. So I appreciate the comment.
Thank you.
Okay, Ananda, Savion, and Nikki.
Thank you. I appreciate Ellie's question.
I withdraw mine.
Because it zooms out to the macro of our systems of inequities, right? So the simplistic answer is like, no, the tool is looking at the granular of decision-making around a particular thing or reviewing a particular policy. What it's not doing is saying, whatever it is that we're looking, it's embedded in inequities, right? It's there, right? What is trying to do is to train the untrained eye around like, we missed something. Where is it? What are potentially look at gatekeeping or gateway systemic policies or systemic decision making in order to be able to start addressing through either addressing inequity or increasing equity, right? I think the other piece that is interesting from a framework perspective is that equity is both a goal and a means, right? So once you address whatever inequity that you are trying to address, there is another level of inequity that you are addressing. So you can look at the same policy and run the policy tool multiple times because, one, your conscience will change, the subjects in which you're trying to analyze will change and shift and diversify, and so you're always in this process of continuous of revising. So I think even like the way that this laid out, I think it, to me, instills that you'll go back to the first, then you go back to the community engagement, you go back to the community, and how it's embedded throughout. So I'm excited about how you all are going to be implementing and using it and finding and refining. I'm also excited about like how we as a board are going to choose, what are some of the things that we're going to choose, and to sort of look at also your question, because I think there are like larger pieces that we can look at. There's also granular pieces that we can look at, in any given topic area. But I think one thing that I think Ali's question reminded me is that, like, for us to not lose sight that we are already looking, that whatever it is that we're looking is inequity. Like, it is already inequitable, right? And I was chuckling a little bit because in 2012 I said on record that there were racism everywhere in Madison, and I was mischaracterized as a pro-voucher candidate. So I feel like, I don't know, I'm having a healing moment right now because we are having this conversation that, like, yes, we have inequities in every classroom all over the district, and it's no fault of anyone on this table currently. But it's definitely something that we're charged to do, and we needed to continue to pursue. And at times, we will be making decisions that are least inequitable because of the way in which the system is set up.
Great. Savion?
Yeah, thank you. Really think that it's a good document to think through, as a broad living document to think through decisions with. Kind of what Ali's point kind of sparked in my brain was a conversation I had with a parent around concerns of, like, La Follette High School scaling back a band program, or, you know, thinking about transportation systems in the cities, and you know, we're not, you know, making, or education doesn't exist in a vacuum in the city.
Yes.
And we're kind of swimming in inequity because it is the norm right now. So I was just curious if, you know, or just thinking through this from, like, a macro resource map to even identify some of these, like, in terms of distribution of especially programs and expertise and skills. We kind of know money through the budgetary process, but getting a macro resource map of those qualitative resources throughout the district.
Well, your comment makes me think about, I think, some of the conversations we've had over the past year at the Education Committee, which is this combination of elected folks from the school board, elected folks from the city council, and Dane County supervisors, along with respective staff from each institution. And I feel like for the last couple of years, we've been grappling as a group on how do we actually enact more equitable decisions, bringing the city, the county, and the district together, and which of those at a macro level would be policy, have policy implications, which of those might be institutional program or delivery of services that might actually close gaps, move the needle. We've kind of struggled as a body to figure out how to do that across our respective institutions up to this point. And yet, maybe using a tool like this or a process to guide our conversation, and maybe some of the topics that we want to focus in on, we might be able to, I don't know, like, bring even just the macro, like the whole environment that young people and their families are situated in, we might actually be able to have a different level of conversation.
Savion, you got a response to that?
Yeah, and I mean, I like the way that it's formatted, and it's just a graphic on a piece of paper, but, like, branching out to, like, you know, if there's a initial proposal, thinking of, does this fit in with efforts at the county or efforts at the city as well?
Yep. Great.
Great.
So there's, if there's one thing I can just add, I noticed on your work group topics, is Matt still in here? That equity policy 9001 is up again, and yet the policy had last been revised in 2017. So just for clarification, does the policy need?
Because of, we adopt a new equity tool that would be done through the policy, so those are one and the same.
Okay. So if we're at a point, if the board is ready at some point to adopt the tool, then does that automatically cue the
revision
the policy being revised along with the tool? Okay.
And if the board saw other revisions to policy 9001, in addition to adopting a new tool, we could do those at the same time, but the reason I put it on the list is because I knew we were adopting the new equity tool, and that has to be done through the policy, if that makes sense.
Great. So I guess back to Nikki's question earlier, or point earlier about the supporting documents not yet being fully fleshed out to accompany the tool. I guess just for our future work, do you want us to come back with the tool and all of the supporting
That would be-
documents? Or
That's me.
can we,
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that. I mean, I
Okay.
think, we'll want an update, you know, later on.
I think part of our,
I mean, not like, we don't have it on our agenda, but once you get going, moving along, we're gonna want an update, yeah.
okay, because part of our hesitancy, and obviously in terms of moving forward with creating a lot of guidance documents, is if this actual format layout is not something that the board is in agreement with, then we don't want to go ahead and make a bunch of guidance documents that's not
I
aligned to
think we
this
were
particular.
in agreement with
frame.
this.
Okay.
But the supporting documents is what we.
I think the supporting documents give us a greater sense of
I agree.
what this does to a certain extent and the outcomes you want to promote. And so I don't think anybody on the board is going to come out and say like we're against the pursuit of equity. I mean, I just think that we'd be having a really different day on the board were that to just be said outright. And yeah, but I think, you know, how we're actually generating the results we're looking for is really relevant to our ability to pursue the tool in terms of, I think what we don't want is a tool that allows for us to give ourselves a gold star, or allows for us to not emphasize our own blind spots, or allows for us to say things like, we spend more money on our students of color in our low poverty schools, and that's equity, and not, you know, take into account who's teaching at those schools and whose parents are employed by this district, and how are we investing in certain students differently than other students, right? And so I think that's what we're looking for in kind of the you know, we don't want you to do work just to do work. We want the tool to work.
But from my understanding, we need to approve the tool for you guys to start your work.
well,
We'd appreciate knowing that this isn't going to change a whole lot, and then we can move through creating
Right.
the supporting documents for it.
I think this is a living document, right? I mean, we will, as you move through this work within the district, it'll change, you'll add, take out, right? From my understanding, I think that this is just a baseline for us, according to policy, to approve this document, right? It's not saying we're all great, it's just, I mean, I just know personally at the city and professionally that, you know, there's a point in time when we have to just get to work, right? And do it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Start with the equity tool, and we revise that equity tool so many times it's still a living document. And we implemented processes and procedures and systems and training, you know, all around the equity tool. But, Kate?
I was gonna just ask if there's any of the topics we just talked through for the work groups for the year that we wanted to articulate now were ones we wanted to use the tool for, just so that we could give some guidance to kind of tie these two discussions together. You brought up advanced learning, which might be a really interesting one to apply the equity tool to, but I don't know if there's others that folks have.
Can I just
comments on.
ask one comment that was directly related to the other question?
Here, wait, can we finish this
Sorry.
one?
Yeah.
I think the behavior education plan.
Oh, yeah, that would be good.
Is something that makes sense to run through the equity tool, and I think you all kind of suggested that a little bit earlier. I think that makes sense.
Jane?
I think, you know, coming to the idea that we're going to approve this tool, that follows naturally, then we begin to say which of these topics do we start using? And it might be possible to think about incorporating some of what you're talking about into the policy. So it is a living document. It will be revisited. You know, we know that we're going to be learning about it as we implement it, something like that. So just thinking about that. But I think what we need is that you all want us to move forward with this.
My,
Nanda and then Nikki.
yeah. So, I would need like a little bit, I need quiet in order to process all of this. But, I'm good with like the layout and like your sequence. I think there are just a couple of, pieces where either need to be broadened or having some proxies to address something that Ali mentioned earlier. So if you're looking at the data, what inequities exist, and there is some examples of it. So either broaden the examples or use proxies like, under-resourced or historically, under-resourced or however you want to use it. And then, because I think and then right below where the benefits and burdens, it says, it names out communities of color, how are communities of color affected. So you can use whatever proxy or the same examples for that. Because if you're looking at, if you're looking at students with IEPs and you're going through the tool, you wanted to understand so if you're looking at analyzing the group of all students in the school district with IEPs, and then you go through this tool, you want to narrow down like which ones are the most fragile of those students, right? So I'm just gonna, I don't actually know in Madison what that looks like, but I'm gonna suggest that it might be English learners with an IEP, first generation immigrant, that qualifies for free reduced lunch, that lives in the South Side, right? Like so that's how narrow. So if you don't limit your language, like how are you calling the person, you can really dig in and understand which one is the most fragile based on whatever data set you're looking at.
Okay, so Nikki?
My
And then we'll close.
my issue on the tool is as follows. I have no problem with the tool. My problem is this: I have a hard time supporting things without the documentation that explains it. It's just something that I need to see how it's used, how it works, and I think we can do that as a living document, but I need some kind of guidance document along with it to explain some of the purposes of it. I think that's part and parcel for me to understand what I'm voting for.
Okay, Ali?
Yeah, so my question is for the board, and I'm curious how we want to communicate whether or not they should pursue this document and flushing out this document, or, not pursue this document and flushing out this document. Because I don't know if you all have a clear sense of that. Okay. How do we want to do that?
I want to move ahead on this with the understanding that it's going to change, and build the structure of process and systems and, the supporting documents as we move along. This is this will change. We'll add, Ananda made a recommendation. Let's make that change on there. But I say we move forward and just approve it. I don't know, we have to make a formal.
I think it has to be by vote.
Do we have to make a formal vote on this tonight?
No, not tonight.
It's on the board's agenda Monday.
Yeah.
For Monday.
I think pursuant to the policy, we
Yeah.
have to adopt the new
Yes.
equity tool. It's a different tool than what was previously adopted, so I believe we do have to adopt it, which is.
So if you guys have more additional questions, you have some time to engage with staff, get your questions answered, and then we will make a decision. We will vote on it at our board meeting next. Okay?
That explains.
All right.
As it stands without additional guidance documents.
Right.
I'm just
Yes.
saying that out loud so
Yes.
that we're all nodding our heads.
Right.
Is that-
Right. Ananda, you have something?
Yeah,
Please.
I do.
Or you're trying to get
I
us-
do feel comfortable in this moment saying I appreciate the pursuit of the new revised tool, and I think that I personally, I can't speak for the entirety of the board, but would approve your ability to interact with the tool expansively, and I appreciate the work you're doing in this effort. I think it's really important. I think it's speaks to a lot of what we're trying to do as a district. So I think it's, I think it's a rough draft in terms of flushing it out, and I think it's a solid version of something worthwhile to pursue. I particularly appreciate the community engagement that wraps around the entirety of it, and the specific kind of measures of impact that exist within it. So,
Okay,
yeah.
all right, I think you're good? You got some guidance, all right?
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you. All right, I think that was the last item on our agenda for tonight. So could I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Monica, your advisory vote, sorry.
Chris, did you drive?
I got you.
We are
I got
adjourned.
You got me?
I got you.
Thanks, Kate.